All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for being here with me today. I'm your host, Nolan. So it seems for now that the strikes on Iran that were reportedly imminent just a couple of days ago seem to have been at least delayed a couple of days after reports came out suggesting that Saudi Arabia and Qatar had been involved in persuading Trump to not go forward with those strikes. But this also simultaneously comes amidst a continuous military buildup in the region, suggesting that this may not be over at all and that tensions are on the rise in the Middle East. So we'll get into all this today and more on the Quest for Clarity podcast.
It is about who we are. It is about what we believe.
They're building up this case just like we did in Iraq. Build up the war propaganda. There was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
The more you tell the truth, the stronger you become.
Mr. Speaker, we're not rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic tonight. We're putting coal in the boiler and setting a course for the iceberg.
Maybe we should improve the liberty of our own country before we seek to do so abroad. Some of us have paid attention to the fact that the expert class, including the foreign policy experts, lie all the time. The correct answer to this, of course, as it always is liberty. All right, everybody, before we begin, if you wouldn't mind going right down below this video and hitting like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate that. Also, if you wouldn't mind going to my Instagram, X, and Spotify accounts and giving all those a follow, I'd really appreciate that as well. Let's get into the news here. We'll start off by reading the antiwar.com article that goes over all of this. It says, it's Dave DeCamp from last night. It says, quote, "The U.S. military is planning to surge military assets to the Middle East to prepare for a potential war with Iran after President Trump backed down from bombing the country, according to a report from the New York Times. U.S. officials told the paper that the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln and some warships from its strike group were on their way to the Middle East from the South China Sea, a roughly week-long trip. The U.S. is also planning to send an array of warplanes to the Middle East, including fighter jets and refueling aircraft and additional air defenses. According to other media reports, the U.S. military's message to Trump amid his threats to bomb Iran is that there weren't enough U.S. assets in the region to face a potential counterattack, which could target the many U.S. bases in the region. Trump was also reportedly told that U.S. strikes likely won't result in regime change and could lead to a prolonged war. So it seems as if amidst all the... So again, you'll remember, if you've been keeping up with the show, there were massive protests in Iran for about the past 2 weeks that were anti-regime protests that were most likely largely fueled by entities like the CIA and Mossad to try and create a pretext. Well, these protests, a lot of them were legitimate against economic grievances that had to do with the Ayatollah. And the CIA and Mossad and Israel and the United States were trying to use these protests to create a pretext to eventually to have the United States intervene on behalf of the protesters, quote unquote, not really, but to create the scenario that it seems justified for the United States to swoop in and try and go forward with a regime change operation against the Ayatollah in Iran after about 30 years of trying to find a way to do so. And it seems as if the reports the other night were that this strike was imminent, that there was even a moment a couple nights ago where it seemed the tensions were rising. It seemed like Iran had closed its airspace and that this might actually go down in the coming hours. It didn't turn out to go down. And this is likely because Trump has said it himself that the protests have largely been quieted down. We'll get into the details of that in a bit. The protests have largely quieted down, and there's not really any more a justification. And it's also the Iranians have said to Trump, at least, that they are not going to go forward with the rumored executions, these public executions they were rumored to be doing. So Trump said himself the killing has stopped, and it seems as if maybe he was trying to walk back the red line that he had set, that if you kill any protesters, we will come in to help. They've definitely killed protesters, and we still have not done anything. So it seems as if Trump maybe understands that this is not something he wants to get involved in and is trying to walk it back. But that's just the rumor. The truth of it is that there are military assets still heading towards the Middle East in like what seemed to be a buildup to a potential war. So it's kind of mixed signals here from the administration. On the one hand, we have Trump seemingly walking this back and saying that he doesn't want to go forward with the strikes because, according to him, the killing is stopped. We also have this continued military buildup. So it gets you thinking, especially with Netanyahu telling him to pause the strikes. There are rumors, again, we'll get into it here in a bit. I have something to read to you guys about this. The rumors that are swirling around is that Netanyahu, much like in the 12-day war, is trying to maybe create a false sense of security for the Iranians. Because if you'll remember, with the 12-day war, right after the United States went forward, or right after Israel, went forward with their first round of strikes against Iran back in June, Netanyahu openly said that the negotiations that the Trump administration were engaged in with Iran were a ruse, and it was just a setup to try and calm them down, get their guard down in Iran, so that Israel could go forward with these strikes with much less air defenses from Iran. Now, whether that's true or not, that was just what Netanyahu said, and the administration didn't really say anything to counter that or say that that's not what happened. So that's supposedly the official narrative of what went down in June, that these negotiations were treated as a ruse and a trick to give the Iranians a false sense of security. So people are saying, a lot of these experts are saying that may be, again, what Netanyahu is trying to do here, is trying to convince the Iranians that he is trying to stop this Trump administration from attacking Iran so that the Iranians will let their guard down, think that nothing is coming, and then the United States will have an open window to go forward with strikes. I don't know. This is just what people are saying. What is funny, though, something else that people are saying is that a lot of the war hawks were very upset when the sun rose the next morning after the tensions almost boiled over and the bombs had not dropped on Iran. This is what Lindsey Graham's instant reaction was the morning after the strikes did not happen. Take a look.
There are a lot of headlines out there that are, in my view, not accurate. President Trump's resolve is not the question. The question is, when we do an operation like this, should it be bigger or smaller? I'm in the camp of bigger. Time will tell. I'm hopeful and optimistic that the regime days are numbered.
It's really unbelievable to see someone so saddened by a war potentially being avoided there. And if you guys have been paying attention to the kind of news around the administration and who has been in, who's been out, Lindsey Graham, for some reason, has been one of the key advisors, seemingly, to the president in terms of foreign policy. You saw him after the Maduro capture in Venezuela. We saw Lindsey Graham on Air Force One, right next to Trump, bragging about this thing, saying that Havana and Cuba are going to be next, that if you're in Havana right now, you should be scared.
He's going to clear our backyard of a drug caliphate. Countries run by narco-terrorist dictators who murder, rape, send drugs into our country to kill thousands of our citizens. This was one of the most sophisticated military operations in the history of the country. What they were able to do was amazing. They knew we were coming. We had a good part of the Navy, and they were able to capture this man alive. No military in the world could have done it. And as to this commander-in-chief, he did something people talked about doing. You just wait for Cuba. Cuba is a communist dictatorship that's killed priests and nuns. They've preyed on their own people. Their days are numbered. We're going to wake up one day, I hope in 26, in our backyard, we're going to have allies in these countries doing business with America, not narco-terrorist dictators killing Americans. This is a big frigging day. And everybody in the world is thinking differently than they were just a few days ago because of what you did.
It was really unbelievable. He's right up close for all of these major foreign policy moments in the administration. And it seems as if there's some people in the administration taking Lindsey Graham's counsel on a lot of these matters, which is deeply concerning. But seems as if he didn't get his way, at least yet. He did not get his way, at least yet, from this administration when it comes to Iran, because he was visibly distraught in that clip. He looked as if someone he knew had just died in that clip. It's really the fact that people like that the fact that people like that run this country is deeply disturbing. But this gets us to the question of why exactly did the Trump administration hold back on these strikes? Because if it was really a matter of about 12 hours that we went from an incredibly harsh posture towards Iran, that it seemed, again, the reports came out from the administration that strikes were imminent. It was just a matter of time. And then overnight, it seemed as if things had really calmed down, and Trump was saying that the killing in Iran had stopped and there's no longer as big of a justification to go forward with the strikes. And this report from the Jerusalem Post seems to indicate that Qatar and Saudi Arabia were the ones behind a lot of the efforts to convince Trump not to go forward with it. So we'll read here from this Jerusalem Post article real quick. It says, quote, officials from Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Oman worked, quote, behind the scenes to diffuse tensions between the United States and Iran in an attempt to prevent an attack, a person with knowledge of the matter told the Jerusalem Post on Thursday. Egypt was also involved in the diplomatic efforts, Reuters reported on Thursday. U.S. President Donald Trump informed Tehran that the United States would not attack and asked it to exercise restraint as well. Pakistani English-language newspaper Dawn reported Thursday afternoon, citing Iranian ambassador to Pakistan, Reza Amiri Moghadam. On Wednesday evening, Trump said that he'd been informed that the killing in Iran's crackdowns on nationwide protests were subsiding. So, again, it seems as if there was a kind of large operation here across these Gulf allies in the to the United States, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman, Egypt. A lot of these key players in the region seem to have been pressuring the Trump administration not to go forward with this, as well as Netanyahu himself. We'll get into this as well. But it seems as if a lot of these players did not want to see this boil over into a full-blown regime change effort, a regional war, because a lot of these guys are also tasked with trying to shoot down the Iranian missiles that are headed towards Israel in the case of a full-blown war. So it seems like they didn't want to get involved in a lot of this. And Netanyahu, it is really bizarre. Netanyahu did call the Trump administration, according to the New York Times, it was the first reporting of it, to tell them to hold off on the strikes. The New York Times says it was to delay the attack on Iran. To be very clear, he certainly isn't telling them to never go forward with an attack on Iran. That's certainly not what he wants. He was just here 2 weeks ago asking Trump to do so. So the question is then, if we acknowledge that he definitely wants this regime overthrown, and he definitely at some point at the right time wants the United States to strike on Israel's behalf, then the question is, why at this moment was it not right for Israel to have the United States do this? So we'll read real quick here. This is just Kyle Anzalone in the Libertarian Institute. It says, quote, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called President Donald Trump, requesting that the United States delay an attack on Iran. Other Middle Eastern countries have asked Washington not to start a new war with the Islamic Republic. According to the New York Times, on Wednesday, Netanyahu asked Trump to postpone an attack on Iran. The outlet did not explain why Netanyahu made the request. Washington and Tel Aviv did not respond to the Times' request to comment on the story. The outlet notes that the sources who relayed Netanyahu's request may be attempting to deceive the Iranian leadership. Before Israel attacked Iran in June, Trump indicated that there was no imminent threat. And that is very true. If you recall, back in the 12-day war, as I said, Netanyahu says that the negotiations that the United States was engaged in were a ruse, and it was attempts to lower the guard of the Iranians. Trump also, just days before the United States were striking Iran, was making it clear that he didn't want to do this. So you can't really trust any direct sources from either the administration, and certainly not Netanyahu. But it really is up for speculation at this point why exactly Netanyahu was telling Trump, and it's now known that Netanyahu is telling Trump, why is it publicly available, to not strike Iran? Because as we all know, and we have known for decades at this point, Netanyahu will do anything to see this regime overthrown. Any chance he gets, he wants to see this regime bombed. Literally just 2 weeks ago on New Year's Eve, he was telling Trump to do so. So I've also seen rumors from a lot of these reporters on X. I've seen reports that Netanyahu was considering the fact that maybe Israel and their air defenses in the Iron Dome weren't ready for Iran's retaliation. That is definitely a possibility. We saw when Iran retaliated to the 12-day war in June, when Iran retaliated to Israel's preemptive strikes, we saw it was really unbelievable to a Western audience that really wasn't used to this necessarily, to the amount that it's like televised and able to be seen. We saw Tel Aviv get lit up with Iranian missiles. I mean, there was casualties in Tel Aviv. I mean, we saw strikes in downtown Tel Aviv from Iranian missiles during the 12-day war, and it was deeply disturbing to a lot of people to see this modern, real kind of Western-style city get bombed in the way that it was. And that may have shown signs that maybe Israel's air defenses weren't as strong as they had originally thought, because a lot was able to get through during the 12-day war. And Netanyahu may be considering, I've seen reports that indicate this, that maybe Israel needs more time to prepare their air defenses. Now, the other factor in all of this is the administration itself, the Trump administration itself, which is usually split on these issues. Now, publicly, they all show a consistent face. They back whatever Trump ends up doing, because that's what you kind of have to do with these situations. You can't really openly go against the president, especially if you're a cabinet member. But there has been reported splits amongst the administration in terms of foreign policy this entire time. Going back all the way to the 12-Day War, we had splits when the United States bombed the Houthis back in February and March of 2025. You had J.D. Vance and Tulsi trying to get them to not do that. And this time, reports from the Wall Street Journal that have since been denied by the vice president's office say that J.D. Vance urged Donald Trump to try diplomacy instead of bombing Iran. Now, I'll read here from the Reuters assessment of this. It says, quote, "Some senior aides to President Donald Trump's administration, led by Vice President J.D. Vance, are urging President Trump to try diplomacy before strikes against Iran," the Wall Street Journal reported Monday, citing U.S. officials. The White House was weighing an offer from Tehran to engage in talks regarding its nuclear program, as Trump seemed to eye authorizing military action against Iran. A spokesperson for Vance said the journal's report was not accurate. Quote, "Vice President Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio together are presenting a suite of options to the president, ranging from a diplomatic approach to military actions," said William Martin, Vance's communications director. Quote, "They are presenting those options without bias or favor." So, again, it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility that J.D. Vance is urging Trump to go with diplomacy here, given that Vance has as weak as he's been during this time as vice president when it comes to foreign policy, and he just caves every single time, and he's not gotten his way this entire time. And it seems like people like Marco Rubio have really out lobbied the president this entire time, whether it be in Venezuela, with the drug boats, all of it. Vance has seen, and the reports over this last year indicate it, Vance is certainly more friendly to the non-interventionist foreign policy view. And this goes back even to his time in the Senate. He was largely known for aligning often with people like Rand Paul in the Senate when it comes to issues of foreign policy. It's funny because when the Senate, just a couple weeks ago, or at least I think it was about a week ago, passed a war powers resolution regarding Venezuela, which would restrict the president's ability to go forward with military action in Venezuela without congressional approval, J.D. Vance's instant reaction to that was that this is a fake, unconstitutional law. The War Powers Act is fake and unconstitutional. That's funny, given the fact that J.D. Vance himself signed on to 2 different war powers resolutions during his time in the Senate regarding Ukraine. So it's really it's upsetting. It's fun. It's really interesting to see him squirm around here because he has to tiptoe this line of trying to stay with the base, which is largely non-interventionist, or at least during the campaign, at least was largely non-interventionist. And then also has to align with whatever the president does, because you can't openly just go against the president, especially not right now, especially when you need his support in an election campaign in 2028. So it's really interesting to see him squirm around here, and especially calling the War Powers Resolution fake and unconstitutional after he himself was involved in drafting War Powers resolutions during his time in the Senate with Rand Paul. It's just interesting, and I think he does. So this is the interesting dynamic here with this story getting leaked to the Wall Street Journal. Now, you can probably, I would probably assume that this was leaked by a person that is in the pro-strike camp, someone maybe a Rubio staffer or someone like that, someone in the Pentagon. Someone probably leaked this who is wanting to go forward with the strikes, because if there is a ongoing debate in the administration, and maybe this person who wants to strike Iran feels as if Trump is being sympathetic to the J.D. Vance position, then you would probably, to put some pressure and maybe, give some pressure to J.D. Vance and the Vance wing of this debate, you would probably leak this story to then force J.D. Vance to come out and deny it and say, no, we're all on the same page. No, I side with whatever the president does. So that's probably, if I had to just guess, completely guessing here, I would probably guess this was leaked by someone who is in the pro-striking Iran camp in the administration in order to pressure the J.D. Vance non-interventionist wing of this debate to get back in line. So that's what I would assume with that. And now there is conflicting reports within the administration, however, because Ryan Grimm, who runs DropSite, who I cite here a lot, great journalist over at DropSite, says his sources inside the White House say that there's effectively no debate going on. This was, and by the way, it's interesting. This came out when it seemed most likely that Iran strikes were imminent. This is when this tweet came out from Ryan Grimm. It says, quote, "Inside the White House, there is effectively nobody arguing against strikes on Iran, with Rubio arguing Trump has to do it or he loses his credibility, I'm told. This means that the only opposition is coming from outsiders like Bannon and Tucker, and allies who are opposed like Saudi, Qatar, and other regional partners. That's a heavy imbalance, suggesting strikes remain likely." So it's very interesting here. It seems as if the pressure maybe against J.D. Vance to shut up about this seems to have worked, and it seems like the White House, as it always is going to just go along with whatever Trump ends up doing, and it seemed as if the interventionist camp was winning out before the Saudis and the Qataris got involved in these discussions. So it's very interesting here. And again, military buildup is continuing. Even as this seems to have been calming down, with these protests calming down and the pretext for war seeming less and less like arguable as these protests calm down, it's really hard to say you're defending the protesters that are non-existent at this point. But as that seems to be dwindling down, as the tensions in the rhetoric seem to have been calming down, military buildup in the region is still building up at the rate that it was. It has not calmed down, because this was one of the major problems. This is why I'm somewhat still in the camp of that this is something to watch out for. I don't think this is over at all, because one of the main issues, I believe we read the article the other day on the show from antiwar.com that showed reports that the military was telling Donald Trump that if we go forward with an Iran strike, we are not prepared for the retaliations from Iran at the bases, and we don't have enough military assets in the region to really go forward with an all-out attack that is seeking regime change, which is what these attacks were allegedly supposed to enact. And this is also, keep an eye on the Venezuela situation, which we haven't talked about recently, but there is still a heavy military buildup in the Caribbean due to the Venezuela situation in the aftermath of the Maduro capture, because just yesterday, we seized another oil tanker. So we're still engaged in this oil sanctions enforcement down in South America. We are, of course, still sending out a lot of assets to Europe for the Ukraine war. We're keeping an eye out for what China is going to do in Taiwan. So we are kind of stretching ourselves thin here. And oh, by the way, there was a lot of military assets that were used up back in June to protect Israel, entirely to protect Israel from the retaliation from Iran. So we're kind of stretching ourselves thin here. And this isn't me saying this. This is a lot of the military reporting saying this, that the majority of our military assets right now are in the Caribbean because of the Venezuela situation. So there was, I believe a report said it was double the amount of military assets that are in the Middle East are actually in South America. So even if they wanted to launch a war back the other night when it seemed most likely, they didn't have the military assets to successfully counter Iranian retaliations, never mind actually get a full-blown regime change, which would really be unlikely with just strikes alone, which is what Trump was being told by the insiders. So again, I would just urge everyone to please watch out for this, because it's definitely not, as they say, it's over. As the rhetoric seems to be calming down, military buildup in the region continues it just continues. The tensions are still rising in a material way in the region. So just like during the 12-Day War, when the rhetoric calms down, it doesn't necessarily mean that the plans have stopped. Because as we know, even though Netanyahu supposedly urged Donald Trump to delay the strikes, he certainly wants this war, and he's going to do a lot to get it. So that's where we'll leave it off for today. That's all the latest updates on Iran, this continuing situation in the Middle East. We'll keep you guys updated here on the show with any later reporting on this. Please be sure to go down below and leave a like and subscribe. Also, please be sure to go to my Instagram, X, and Spotify accounts and give all of those a follow, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Have a good one.
It is about who we are. It is about what we believe.
They're building up this case just like we did in Iraq. Build up the war propaganda. There was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
The more you tell the truth, the stronger you become.
Mr. Speaker, we're not rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic tonight. We're putting coal in the boiler and setting a course for the iceberg.